Hey guys, before I get started on this episode, just wanted to let you know that the Golden State with Mates Patreon is now 50% off to new members through the end of January. At the end of the month, I'll also be giving Best Mate members the chance to win this copy of Stephen Curry's book, Shot Ready. So you check that out. And for more Warriors content, I'll leave a link in the description. Coming up on this episode, Stevie joins me to discuss what the Warriors do next in the wake of Jimmy Butler's devastating season-ending injuries and what deals could take place as a result before next month's deadline. Alrighty, so I did a Patreon episode yesterday. For those of you that haven't checked that out, you can, where I kind of gave my first thoughts and spilled out my reaction to Jimmy Butler's season-ending ACL injury, which from a human standpoint is just devastating for him, and obviously it's devastating for the Warriors as a team. Stevie, what about you? What are your first reactions, thoughts when it came through that Jimmy Butler was going to be out for the remainder of the season?
Yeah, I watch everything on tape delay for the most part, except for games on the weekend. But fortunately or unfortunately, I was watching pretty much live, just a little bit behind the tape. And as one of my favorite players, maybe my favorite player of the Eastern Conference since that 220 Miami run, and then especially after the second one with a team that both teams nobody really thought would be any sort of contender, him carrying them next to Bam. Um, Likely his career never being the same, even if he comes back and plays. Now he's a two-footed player. Yeah, he's not like a leaper. He's a high IQ defender, so maybe he'll have a Sean Livingston or Andre Iguodala like Twilight, but he's already at such a deep age, and anybody who's ever had knee problems, like you said, from a human standpoint, it's a difficult thing to watch, especially seeing him in agony on the floor and such a tough guy. You know that, like, not sure what he's going to be like when he returns, but that's why he was given that huge extension, so that he could play with confidence, not worry about these types of catastrophic, unforeseen freak accidents that end up in season-ending injuries. So as much as from the human situation, prayers go out to Jimmy Butler and his family and so forth and his recovery, but like from a franchise standpoint, that's why he's got the additional 60 plus million owed to him next year in guaranteed money. Unlike American football, where you get hurt and you lose it, he's got all that money for the rest of the year and the next year. Unfortunately, at the timing, it's like you don't want to talk about moving the body while it's still warm, but we only have until February 5th to figure this out of what is the best move for the franchise. So I'm curious, after day and a half, 2 days, what's the primary route that, if you were in the driver's seat, not your prediction so much, but what would you do if you were the one steering the ship?
Yeah, I thought Mike Dunleavy Jr.'s comments yesterday were interesting. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. And for what it's worth, I don't think they're going to trade Jimmy Butler. I don't think they will. But I thought when he said he got asked the question directly by Anthony Slater, like, is there a chance you move him, essentially? And his response was, I don't envision that. Which to me was like, I felt like if he was categorically, no, we're not doing that, he would say it. It was like, no, like, we're not trading Jimmy Butler. It felt like to me he left the door slightly ajar. And I think the Warriors owe it to Steph to at least consider it and at least take calls, explore what it would look like. I think the human element to this, I think the way you treat particularly superstars, big name players in this moment, I think is important for the future. Like, I think you can't necessarily just discard Jimmy Butler because now he's injured and think that that doesn't impact things moving forward. Like, I think from a cultural standpoint and just from like superstars coming and playing for your team moving forward, I think it does make some impact. Like, I think we look at the Dame aspect in Milwaukee when, like, him just getting waived, and it's like, is that really how you wanna treat your superstar players? Now, the Bucks are in a very similar situation that the Warriors are in terms of the Bucks are trying to maximize Giannis, they're trying to build a contender around him, they're trying to even probably more desperately trying to convince him to stay. I don't think the Warriors are in a situation where they're having to convince Steph to stay, but it's a similar situation if you're trying to build a contender. And I think if I was Jimmy Butler, he's got so much respect for Steph Curry that if Mike Dunleavy came to him and said, "Look, mate, we don't want to trade you, but we owe it to Steph to explore it," I think Jimmy should probably understand that motive, I suppose, if he has as much respect for Steph as what's been shown over these past 12 months since he arrived. So I think the Warriors wouldn't be doing their due diligence. Unfortunately, it sucks to say, but I just don't think they'd be doing their due diligence if they didn't explore a Jimmy Butler deal in the next 2 weeks. What about you?
I think to play devil's advocate to the concept of how superstars should be treated, and I'm not saying anything that you said isn't true, that there isn't rippling effects of how you treat them or what I mean, there's an idea of what they're getting paid with a max salary, but we've had this argument going, especially back during the LeBron and Curry peak of the mid 2010s, is that, yeah, that's the max salary that they're allowed to get. But if there were no salary cap, these guys were, without inflation, probably worth $100 to $200 million to the sport, especially the three big names adding Kevin Durant to that circle. But we go with Dame. Yeah, they cut him. Would Dame have ever chosen or signed with Milwaukee in free agency? No.
Yeah.
In fact, the biggest reason it took so long for the Trailblazers to move him is because he was so specific on going to Miami. Same thing with the Jimmy Butler situation. He wanted to be in Phoenix. He went to the Warriors because they guaranteed him the money. If there was no guarantees of the money, he would have done everything possible to avoid that trade from finalizing itself. So, uh, I'm not I'm not saying not to consider or not to go and speak to them and not be considerate of not only the human element but the business element of your future transactions of how superstars will see your market and your franchise specifically. But to be fair to the franchises that are supposed to be running themselves not just as a business, it's different than a business. Business is just about money. Like you have a fan base that you're responsible to, and the face of your franchise, which is not Jimmy Butler, that the Warriors are supposed to be making their decisions upon. And maybe make a shift. Like there's been an odd amount of, I would say, 20 to 40% of the fan base has basically just like waved the white flag, not just on this season, but like the maybe it's time to trade Steph talk has got real loud real fast. And it's an interesting thing for me because I feel like it's something that I've been talking about since like 2020, that if we trade Steph Curry, the next time that we win a championship will be when my grandkids are having grandkids. And it's just like a reality that people seem to like not fully like comprehend of how good the other young cores are around the league in comparison to even the young core we would have post Steph Curry with all whatever we would get back for him. Um, and I find it extremely interesting that somehow we skip trading Draymond, but it's okay to trade Curry. I just don't understand this lapse in this like compartmentalizing of like Draymond is untouchable, but somehow we jump to let's go through a full tank and build around our young core and trade Curry. I just don't know how this jump happens. So
Yeah, I don't think we need to discuss. That's not even a possibility. Like, I don't think the Steph conversation. I mean, people can do that on social media if they want. I just don't think that's even relevant to discuss. I don't even want to talk about that. It's just so far out of the picture for me. Can we talk? I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about right now in the wake of what's happened in the past 48 hours. The Kuminga situation.
mm,
Where do you land on it? He comes out yesterday, looks pretty average first half minutes, very brief first half minutes to start second quarter. And then goes for 20 points in 21 minutes. Looks I think we've got to admit, it looks pretty good. I want to give some credit to him for actually coming out and playing the way he did after playing 10 minutes in the last 6 weeks after 16 straight DNPs. You got to give him some credit for that. They lost by 18. It wasn't his fault. They were down 30 early second half. I think there was there was a bit of a lag effect on the Jimmy News, I thought, just the overall energy in the building, I don't think
Mm.
was great in that game against the Raptors, and the result didn't particularly surprise me. But I don't know. I kind of consider, I think I said yesterday on the Patreon episode, that if I woke up on Monday morning before the Jimmy news, or before the Jimmy injury, I probably would have said that there's a 100% chance that Jonathan Kuminga gets dealt in the next 2 weeks. Has that percentage dropped for you? Do you see, like, I would still have it as more likely than not, but maybe it's dropped to like 95%. Maybe it's dropped to 90% on the basis of what we saw yesterday, where he looked like a guy that the Warriors are going to have to, unfortunately, as weird as it sounds, like they're going to kind of have to rely on him at least over the next 2 weeks here before the deadline or before any kind of move is made.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we weren't able to go on in the direct aftermath of what happened to Jimmy. But my first reaction, as most people, was that Jonathan is going to get moved, and maybe Jonathan and Butler are moved simultaneously or in two congruent trades and so forth for, if not an upgrade this year, whatever the optionality slash upgrade to build for next year or the future or whatever. Then after sitting there for the night and in the morning, and I shared it with you before the Toronto game, before being influenced by recency bias, because I had no expectations that I thought he would play. I did not expect him to look that good. Him taking a couple threes early and then transitioning to just getting inside, getting to the rim, and getting 5 rebounds in 20 minutes. But prior to this outing and him looking better than I think anybody expected for him to play after being on ice for so long, is that we were talking a bit, and then you went on the next day to expand on the idea of D'Anthony Melton, and regardless of him specifically, optionality,
Yeah.
especially in the aftermath of Jimmy Butler, the need for optionality now has become amplified on top of that, with the likelihood of us being a true contender this year significantly diminishing by losing one of the top 20 players in basketball. There's really no argument that if we're not a contender, why, if a trade required 25 million, you would be trading an expiring young player to a player who's owed $27 million left on the book, is turning 37 next year. So the whole idea of just like, we can't trade Draymond, but we need to trade JK, with regards to optionality, there's no logic to it. It's just compartmentalizing takes. It's, we need optionality, but we can't trade Draymond. Well, if you don't believe we're a contender, which almost everybody doesn't believe now, unless you think there's a trade that who we bring in without moving Draymond makes us a true contender, then keeping him on the books makes sense. But if not, if the goal is optionality, it should be moving on Butler and Draymond, keeping JK, whether he plays or not, that's up to Kerr. But by the end of the year, his stock can't be any lower than it was prior to this game. And if we don't want him, he comes off the books. And if not, he's an expiring deal that's much easier to move than even Draymond's $27 million expiring, because he's such a specific player. So I don't know how that's not more of a talking point. I don't know how that's not a thing. Like these people like Spears from the Plus Minus Pod, they just talk in a way of these, like, they make very specific concepts and then they remove this concept from other takes. So optionality, Draymond is the third most expensive contract, has another year on his deal, unless we're a contender, has no value for the Warriors moving forward, but he's unmovable. But then JK needs to be moved, even though he's on an expiring. I don't understand the economic logic. There's just none.
I suppose if you're not a contender, then there's an argument to keep Draymond just out of loyalty's sake, out of being like a franchise. That is kind of the value to me in that situation, is that, like, you're keeping around a franchise legend. You're not just discarding him when you're going to be out of contention. Like, I think every discussion we've had over Draymond is getting an upgrade from Draymond to try and become a contender. So you brought up an interesting point there, the idea of trading Jimmy and or Draymond, right? I just want to stick with Jimmy because I just still don't think they're going to trade Draymond. Okay, so I want to stick with the idea of trading Jimmy and not trading Kuminga. I can't really compute that to me because to me, if you're going to trade Jimmy, it's because there's a deal out there where you think you can actually become some kind of legitimate chance in the playoffs this season. And you've already shown over the past 6 weeks that you don't think Kuminga is part of a team that's trying to do something in the playoffs. Therefore, to me, if there's a Butler trade, it also includes Kuminga in the deal. There's no way to me in which you are trading Jimmy Butler and keeping Jonathan Kuminga on the roster because again, you're just not moving Jimmy unless you think there's a move out there. And I think that's going to be very difficult to pull off because obviously you're going to have to incentivize a team to take on that $56.7 million deal for next season. You're going to have to give up legitimate assets. You're probably going to have to take back a distressed asset from another team who they want to get off so willingly that they're not necessarily needing to take a post Steph Curry picks back along with Butler. Again, whether that's possible or not, we can talk about the Anthony Davis situation. We can talk about the Kings and whether there's a Butler Kuminga deal there with the Kings that makes any sense. I don't know. Is there a way you mentioned it before? Is there a way you think where Butler gets moved and Kuminga doesn't?
Well, whether we include Draymond or Kuminga, I think that the only trade available with regards to Butler, I mean, Anthony Davis is interesting, but I don't think that's a very wise decision after what we've seen injury-wise with him this season. But I think we go back to the trade that not only us, but many people have been circling, and it's the Michael Porter Jr. trade, but it has to include Nicholas Claxton. That is the trade that actually solidifies the front court, and it gives you a second punch. And arguably, I mean, I know that on paper and names wise, even putting them in the same sentence of Michael Porter Jr. and Jimmy Butler sounds blasphemous, but offensively, objectively, Michael Porter Jr. has been a top 15 offensive player as an individual entity. So if we're talking about offensive punch, which has been the thing that has been our Achilles heel throughout the season, if you add not only Michael Porter Jr., but an actual starting center, something we do not have. We simply do not have a starting level caliber center. Draymond's not a starting center, and Post isn't. Now, Draymond might be a closing center, depends on who you ask. Obviously, if you ask me, that's not the answer, but many people do, but he's not a starting center in any capacity. Nicholas Claxton, he's not a sexy pick. He is a top 15 center in this league, at least. But you could argue with, especially in the Warriors system, which wants to run zones, switch. How many 1 through 5 defenders are 6'11 and can score in this league and have a higher motor and are a lob threat? I mean, count them on one hand. Now, is he ever going to consistently put up 25 points? No. Is he going to be an all-star? No. But like as a floor for actually having a starting level center and somebody who defensively, like on the perimeter, he's better. He's basically a better perimeter defender than anybody on our team outside DeAnthony Melton on guards. Yeah, like compare him to Moses Moody, Pajemski on the perimeter. 6'10", 6'11", Claxton's a better defender. And it's just like, people only look at this individual player and then compare them to what they're worth, but having a starting level center makes everyone better. And that's why when Draymond's out, and because he doesn't score, he's making everyone worse on offense. On defense, he makes people better. He's a commander. But on offense, when he's willing to score, when he's willing to cut, everything works. The problem is we only get that version of Draymond a couple times a month. And if he's not willing to score when nobody's guarding him, he is not just affecting Steph. It's not just the junk defense. He's affecting Pajemski. He's affecting Post. He's affecting everyone on the floor. And a guy like Claxton, who, if it's not his play, kicks it immediately or cuts to the basket, that vertical spacing automatically makes everything better. And the numbers work pretty easily because we're in an anomaly. The Nets have two players who are would immediately become a part of our top 5 players, and they can take on money. So we could trim double digits of money this year and get an upgrade if we're willing to spend assets. And if the picks are the only thing that matter, then fucking trade Curry now. If it's the only thing that matters, it seems like an obsession. The picks past Curry, then trade Curry today if all you care about is the picks. But if you care about actually trying to win a title with Curry, which should be the only thing that matters, then fuck the picks. It's not like we have this, we act like we have OKC stockpile of picks. There's like 4 teams in the West who have better young cores and more assets moving forward. So worrying about the post-Steph Curry era, worry when it gets here. Because you're going to lose half your fan base anyways. Half the fan base aren't Golden State Warriors fans. They're Steph Curry fans, and the front office knows it. So maybe consider that when worrying about the post-Steph Curry era, because we got a ton of bandwagon fans that are going to disappear the minute that he evaporates from the Golden State roster.
So let's evaluate this Brooklyn deal then quickly. So you're saying Jimmy and what else goes out, and you're getting, so Jimmy makes 54. You'd have to add
It's
Buddy
either
Hield.
Draymond or it's Kuminga.
Okay.
And then it immediately works, yeah? So if you add let's just add Kuminga because it's easier, right? Because then we can remove the Draymond element. You add Kuminga, and then I have to look at the specific trade, but you're basically right there where you get Claxton, Michael Porter, and then they would be way too over, so they would include Sharp or Williams or whoever, one of their $4 to $6 million. So because they can take an additional almost $13 million onto their books and still be under the cap.
Yeah. And you're essentially left with a Steph, Moody or Melton, MPJ, Draymond, Claxton starting 5. That's what we're rolling with.
Well, I wouldn't make the trade unless Draymond's going out. That's because Claxton makes no sense with Draymond in the rotation, right? But basically every big that if someone goes, okay, Pete, like I got a big for you for the Warriors, and it's like, oh, he doesn't fit next to Draymond, we'll do that all day. But you remove Draymond from the starting lineup, and there's tons of options. And why are we being handicapped by the idea that now we can't trade Draymond when we're probably not a contender? It increases our optionality, and it makes us a black horse if we add these 2 players. We saw what we looked like at the end of Miami game, and it's not just that game. I know that there's the whole Ewing effect. We've seen, this is not the first moment, we've seen big stretches where Draymond is either out or has been ejected, and we start playing Warriors basketball. Yeah, some of it has more pick and roll, but there's more movement, and everybody is playing their role instead of waiting for the ball to touch Draymond's hands and then hand it to Steph and force it to Steph. So, yeah, but Michael Porter Jr. is an interesting idea because there's this idea not taking on money. Again, sorry to bring up Spears because he's always like, oh, we need a voice that knows the Warriors, and they bring him up. The Warriors aren't going to take any extra money on. He has the same amount of years as Butler. So I don't know where this idea that they can't make the Michael Porter Jr. trade. They can send picks in Butler's contract, and he comes off at the exact same time. There's no added salary to it. There's no logic to this argument of we can't take extra money on. Who are they getting in 2027 in free agency that they're so concerned with being able to maximize the last great years of Steph Curry?
Yeah, well, they obviously had this potential thought that Giannis could make it all the way to free agency, which I don't think will happen. I think if he'll probably, if he doesn't want to stay in Milwaukee, he won't sign an extension, and then they'll trade him to a team where he does want to go to, and therefore maybe the Warriors can get in the mix there. But I just don't think he's going to get to, the 2027 free agency class right now. It does look pretty appetizing, but a lot of these great players, they just don't get to free agency. They either sign extensions with their current team, or they get traded and say, I want to go to that team because that's the only team I'll sign an extension with, and that's what happens. So I'm with you. There's some of these guys, and even guys with longer term deals. I think I mentioned it in an episode last week. It's like Jaren Jackson Jr., for example. His contract is not good whatsoever. But if you could get him without giving up much in the way of assets because his contract is that bad, are you getting a better player in 2027 for agency than Jaren Jackson Jr.? Probably not. And therefore, this idea of optionality to me, and I think that's probably the thing. I'd be shocked. Like, I think there has to be a certain player that the Warriors are going to give up post Steph picks for. I think Giannis is obviously the Hail Mary. Trey Murphy, I think that by the sound of it, Dunleavy had his press conference yesterday and he was asked, like, would you give up like the future draft capital? And he's like, if we're going to give up post Steph picks, it has to be for a guy who's going to make an impact post Steph after he retires. Trey Murphy fits that bill.
Mm, yep.
The, Giannis obviously fits that bill. And then the only other one, which Kawakami suggested in an article yesterday, is Larry Markkinen, who's like 28. He's young enough. He could
My
potentially.
boy Lauri Markkanen, he never dies. It's always a possibility for the Warriors.
It's always there. It's always on the right.
We have a rule in my house that I'm only allowed to use Lauri's name 3 times in the week because it's already expired since 2023 that my girlfriend doesn't allow me to bring Lauri Markkanen's name into discussions. Do little podcasts on the bike driving, and I start bringing up Lauri. It's like, that's it. That's the last time. We don't need to hear him in the trade talks anymore for the rest of the week.
I have a hard time believing that the Warriors will give up post Steph picks for Michael Porter Jr. and Nick Claxton. As much as you could argue they should, I don't think they're gonna. I don't think they're quite at the level. I think the Warriors would probably look at Michael Porter Jr. and say, we could do with him. Certainly, we're interested, but we also think his numbers this season are a little bit of a false prophecy. And that what you got from him in Denver is more like what we're going to get from him in Golden State, which again, particularly if you still had Jimmy on the team, would be fine. That'd be a nice addition, but we're not willing to give up post Steph Curry picks for that. Now, I think Trey Murphy, the third, is potentially a little bit different because I think there's a big difference with him being on a team-friendly 25 to 27, $28 million contract for the next 3 years. Like, that's a really valuable contract. That's the kind of money the Warriors will be willing to take on and will be willing to give up multiple first round picks for. So the thing for me is not necessarily about whether they're going to be giving up post Steph picks, because to me that only comes down to Giannis and Trey. And if those respective two teams don't want to give those guys up, then it's kind of a pointless conversation. The more interesting idea is, would they be willing to take on a riskier player whose value isn't very high because of like contract reasons, whether it's Anthony Davis, whether it's a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't know. Can we think of some, like, there's nothing outrageous when it comes to this kind of post Jimmy Butler before the trade deadline. Like, there's no such thing as an outrageous and unrealistic trade idea. Like, we've had ideas come up here from Bleacher Report. I think the Warriors plus one, as guys mentioned it yesterday, in regard to John Morant. Like, I don't know. Let me know. Is there anyone that you think who's kind of off the radar or was off the radar that suddenly comes onto the radar now that this Jimmy Butler injury has happened?
So since we had already been exploring not only over the last couple of weeks about Jonathan Kuminga's multitude of possibilities of where he could go, I think that we've explored pretty much every single option, even prior to the Jimmy Butler situation. I think that with regards to how we view what we are moving forward and what our options are, there's so much ideas about the value of the picks. I think sometimes we forget that like one young player is often far more valuable than 2 shitty firsts. The phrase we use often, like, it, not all firsts are created equal. These post Steph picks are seen as gold at the moment. Well, Pajemski was seen as gold like 18 months ago. And now now maybe he's swinging back up into that way. And the addition of a Michael Porter Jr. Claxton or a Lauri Markkanen or a Jaren Jackson Jr., we only see it in face value of what their floor impact is individually. Adding dynamic bigs and people who can shoot make the world of difference for these types of role players, that their impact, not just their raw stats and the way that they look and the way that they're perceived, it changes by the players that they play around them. And it seems to just be something that's completely neglected when we're looking at like Michael Porter Jr. being able to make tough shots in late situations, shooting over 40%, being a mismatch, is a huge plus for a guy like Pajemski, a guy like Moody, a guy like Post. Same thing with Claxton, having a rim roller. Lauri Markkanen, I don't like to bring him up anymore, mostly because I think Utah just doesn't want to move him. But if he were available, if they called and said, hey, 4 first-round picks in the Jimmy Butler contract, if it doesn't include any of our young core and that's the cost, and anybody scoffs at that, I mean, I'm not saying you have to take that deal, but pretending like that is not an option, I just don't think the on-floor impact and how it relates to our pre-existing young core is just being completely neglected. I think that's something to really consider that, yeah, it's nice to have the picks. It would also be nice to have 3 young guys that everybody wants again, which is something we haven't had for this entire discussion of where Kuminga's going. It's like, we're only getting value from picks. But before, if we included Moody or Pajemski as of the offseason, that was supposed to be better than a single late pick. So I think that's something to consider.
I think it's a great point you bring up, just in terms of like the role players, the young guys, the Moody's, the Pajemskis, even some of the veteran guys. Like you saw D'Anthony Melton in yesterday's game against the Raptors, just like one of his lesser games for a while, like being on this tear. But it's a lot easier when Jimmy Butler's running the non-Curry minutes and you can fold in behind Jimmy. He's the head of the snake. You've got Melton, you've got Orford, you've got Pods. Suddenly those guys are now coming off the bench. And who knows, fingers crossed, maybe they still might have a similar impact. But that's my biggest concern about this team now, is that strength of the non-Curry minutes that was playing itself out over the past few weeks and becoming a really big factor in why the Warriors were 12-4 in their last 16 games prior to the Raptors loss. That strength could once again like become a real weakness. And that's, if you're going to be, and even if you just want to be a playoff team this season, that's why you probably have to make a trade before the deadline, is to get another piece who not only makes you better because of their individual skill set, but can help make others better. And that's what I think the biggest thing with Jimmy is that if you look at his numbers, he was a 25-5 guy. And you know what? A lot of people would say, well, anyone could put up, like, there's a lot of guys in the league that can put up 25-5, but that doesn't go to show the impact of Jimmy Butler. Those raw box score numbers don't show that. His ability to make his teammates better was what was the real beauty about him. And I think was probably one of the things we missed looking before the Butler trade, is that, again, we can look sometimes at just the raw numbers of some of these guys and say yes or no on whether or not they're a good trade target or not. It just goes so much beyond that. And I think, I'm not sure a guy like, will Michael Porter Jr. elevate the likes of Moses Moody and Brandon Jeffsky? Maybe. Could Lauri Markkanen? Maybe a little bit, because I think Markkanen would, because I think it changes the dynamic of your team when you've got like a 7-footer out there who could be a legitimate like small ball 5 for you. I suppose you could throw MPJ into that mix as well. I just think I have more comfort with Markkanen as a second scorer than I do MPJ, even though despite the fact what he's done this season. Am I wrong in that? Am I wrong in feeling like Markkanen is a better option for this team than Porter is, or do we think that the difference is pretty negligible?
I think it's a really difficult thing to assess even internally, because everything says that there should be a gigantic distance in between the two of how we perceive them. Michael Porter Jr. has like shown up in big games in the playoffs, and Lauri Markkanen hasn't played at all. So there's also that of like never really tasting the big moment and just assuming that what he does in low stake situations in Utah somehow will immediately transfer to Golden State Warrior postseason basketball. I think there's something about the level of the way that Lauri Markkanen finishes at the rim. It's so imposing, and so, especially when he's on a mismatch, that it feels like it counts more than 2 points. And I think sometimes we're affected by what's impressive rather than what's impactful. If Michael Porter Jr. is left open the way that many people are left open in the Golden State system when Steph's on the floor, he's a willing cutter and he can finish at the basket well. Now, does it look as good as Karl Anthony Towns or the way that Scotty Barnes looks when he cuts to an open rim? No, he's not that type of finisher because he's more of a finesse player. But he's still almost 7 feet tall and he still finishes above the rim and he still cuts. And I think shot making wise, the amount of a window that Michael Porter Jr. needs is smaller than Lauri Markkanen's. I think if you're talking about a wide open off ball shot, no dribbles, one pass, Lauri Markkanen is the superior shooter to my. In fact, maybe Michael Porter Jr. doesn't particularly want that shot as much. He wants a hand in his face. He wants a bit of grit and grime on his shot. It would be great to mend those two players, but I think the distance is smaller than we think. I'm not putting that on you or other people, including me, because I would obviously like Lauri Markkanen more for other reasons, but I think there's something about him that we feel like he's better. I've watched a lot of Nets, man. Like it's just the type of shots that he's making right now, Porter. It implies that he's a top 5 3-point shooter in the league. Now, if that sustains when he's actually playing in playoff basketball and he's not playing for the Nets who are expected to lose, if that maintains itself, who knows, right? But I like your question though, like who, because it started getting me really depressed, man. Like after the Butler injury, I just wanted to. I've been on antibiotics for a while because I had an injury, as I told you, in a crash. So I sympathize even more, empathize more with the recent injury. But like, we keep talking about our bench production. It's not our bench production. It's a Jimmy Butler ran unit. That is why the bench is essentially the best bench in basketball, because Jimmy Butler is one of the best commanders in history. Like he's never going to be put on that tier 1. But you take him just below, and I mean just a sliver below the Magic Johnsons and LeBrons of the world, and he's right there running units and elevating players that if otherwise didn't have him, like you brought up Melton, we don't know what Melton would be if he always played with a Jimmy Butler his whole career. So it's interesting to think of what player would be an interesting addition to add and make us be able to run better. I don't have an answer for that, honestly, because I think those type of players aren't particularly available. The off-ball players are more available, but expensive. But the players that can run units and be productive and not be a minus on defense, I mean, why would anybody trade a guy like that?
I feel like we should discuss the Sacramento aspect of this because they're the team that obviously have the most interest in JK. Is there any world in which the Kings come to the Warriors and say, we'll flip you Sabonis and DeRozan for Butler and Kuminga and you don't even have to give us a pick? And the Warriors turn around and say, you know what? Yeah, okay. Like, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And you get this infusion of talent and scoring and rebounding with Sabonis. Now, the Sabonis Draymond, again, we're talking about another big, just doesn't work with Draymond whatsoever. Like, it's just a continual thing. But maybe it's Levine instead, but like Levine and DeRozan, and it's already worked. It's already happened twice and failed twice. Like, I don't want to buy. I'd rather keep Jimmy and Kuminga in that aspect. Sabonis is maybe a little bit more interesting to me. But is there any kind of package where you're willing to trade Jimmy Butler for that?
I think in a world where the Kings would be willing to get off Sabonis and not take a pick back, and basically the only value coming back is JK and the idea of the optionality of Butler's contract being a pseudo-expiring contract next year, would be under the circumstance that the Kings know something physically about Sabonis that the rest of us don't. I think that they need to get a first-round pick, maybe not a great first-round pick, but a first-round pick if letting go of their one above-average player Sabonis is basically their one guy that, at least on paper, is supposed to be a little bit better than everybody else's like fourth guy on their roster.
Well,
Um,
I think can I just butt in? I think the idea of it would be, hey, we get to take Butler, who has got 1 year left on his deal, and we give up Sabonis, who's got 2 years left on his deal, and no one thinks like Domantas Sabonis has got 2 years, 105 million left. Sorry, 2 years, $95 million left, or something around that mark. Like no one thinks he's worth that, and so to give yourself a little bit of optionality again going forward. And the Warriors essentially say to themselves, you know what, we get better in the short term because now instead of having a $57 million player on the sidelines, we get a guy who's a pretty decent big. But the offset of that is, well, your cap space in 2027 is just going out the drain because you got to take that extra year off. And therefore, the Warriors would say to the kid, well, we're not giving you a pickup for that. Like, we're just
it's
not
an
doing it.
it's an interesting thing to look at, especially like you said, because the Kings have been the one like vocal like interest in JK, not just now, but in the offseason. I'll just make the argument again that if the only thing that matters is the picks, then just trade Steph Curry now, because the Michael Porter Jr. Claxton deal only doesn't just make you better, it gives you more optionality economically moving forward. So if you're making a deal that's going to limit your economic optionality and not make you a contender, you could add Sabonis and DeRozan to this team and not send Jonathan Kuminga or anybody out, and this team's not a contender. It makes you better, I suppose. But Sabonis has never been an anchor to a defense, and he shot the three okay last year, but the way that he looked early this season, it looks like that was an anomaly, not something that he has added to his repertoire. So, yeah, we were texting a little bit about, well, I was texting you about DeRozan, and maybe that's like he looks better than I thought watching him over the last couple weeks. DeRozan seems more interesting on court than what I saw early in the season from Sabonis. Sabonis looks like his style of basketball is caught up with him physically, even though he's not as old as some of these other bigs. And I just don't think that he's really that big of an addition. I think that like the way that the Warriors want to play is to get everybody going, and Sabonis having some pressure on the rim is great. But I think adding another player that's so specific and so limited in what in their approach to offense and especially in defense, I think it kind of makes us worse in a way than better.
Yeah. There's a very obvious trade that the Kings would do where it's Kuminga for DeRozan. Like the Sacramento would do that. The question of God, like, would DeRozan be better than Kuminga probably over the second half of the season? Yeah, maybe. Is it making you like? Can you understand the idea of this guy as a? This will sound blasphemous, but as a Jimmy Butler impersonator, as that guy who is essentially has taken the Jimmy spot of I'm running the non-Steph Curry minutes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a mid-range scorer who can use my pump fakes and stuff and whatnot to get to the free throw line. Like he does, like we have to admit, he does some of the stuff Jimmy does. Okay, now not nearly to the same level, but you know what? He also makes half the money of Jimmy Butler, so you wouldn't expect him
to be
do.
fair to DeRozan, he is a significantly better mid-range shooter than Jimmy Butler is, and has been consistently for his entire career. So we can't say that like Butler just does everything better than DeRozan does. DeRozan is one of the best mid-range shooters of this generation. He's also a shitty-ass defender and has no defensive position. He can't guard the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So that's his. But the trade has to include Precious Achiuwa. That's a part of the trade. Yeah, you have to get Precious back for Kuminga. Kuminga for DeRozan that trade makes no sense. Like, just keep Kuminga and let him try to be Kuminga, whatever that is. But if you can Precious and DeRozan somehow have a little bit of fusion together in the last couple weeks. Now, of course, the Kings probably falling in love with it, and they're going, nah, we can't let go of Precious Achiuwa, who we got for free. That's what every team does every time a semi-young player starts to show any shine. But Precious would be exactly the type of big, unlike the Claxtons or Gaffords or Kesslers of the world. Steve Kerr, I'm sure has been salivated every time. I'm sure when we picked up Wiseman, he's like, but what about Precious Achiuwa? Precious Achiuwa, that's my type of kid. 6'8", can guard maybe not 1 through 5, but 2 through 5, at least 3 through 5, puts pressure on the rim, thinks he can shoot, can't shoot. Is that not like Steve Kerr's wet dream for a backup 5? So but regardless for him, he has a motor, he has an intensity, he's a plus defender. It's the type of player that, like, as much as all of us are rooting for Trayce Jackson-Davis, there's so many players that are an upgrade for the Trayce Jackson-Davis minutes that, like, it seems inconsequential, but everything we're trying to get out of Trayce Jackson-Davis, when it doesn't happen, it's affecting all the other players. Just where we're talking about the osmosis between the other 5 players on the floor. If Trayce Jackson-Davis was 15% better, how much better everybody else's numbers would look if he was that much better. And I'm not saying Precious is 15% better than him, but I think Precious definitely thinks he's 15% better than Trayce Jackson-Davis. So that's just the idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I personally think the DeRozan thing is coming up, and a lot of people are talking about it. But again, that's not putting you into any kind of relevance. Like, I think you're just better off letting Kuminga do what Kuminga wants to do for the second half of the season. Like, even if that kind of gets in the way of Steph and Draymond a little bit, it's like DeRozan's not going to be additive enough to be any kind of relevant playoff team. So I could see the Warriors just saying, yeah, we're just going to keep Kuminga.
I think the DeRozan stuff happened before the Toronto game. So, like, it was under the assumption that, and it was before the Butler injury, it was the concept that Kuminga's never going to touch the floor again, but the Kings already have their perception of what Kuminga is, and they're willing to give up X even if they never see him on the floor again. You see him on the floor, and all this, I mean, the recency bias is impossible to ignore. When a player plays well, especially a young player, all of a sudden it's like, why am I trading DeRozan for that? Well, if Kerr's not going to play him, then it doesn't particularly matter. Now, if Kerr's going to, like, Kuminga has always played better when he starts, and that's why in the offseason, in our first pod, I said, this is what they should do, and nobody thought it was a good idea, but you start Kuminga and tell him he's not going to close. And it's like, oh, why would you do that? Because of the optics. And it's just like, well, he didn't play for like 20 games. That's way worse than saying, look, we're going to give you 25 minutes. This is going to be the first 8 minutes of the first 8 minutes of the second, and the first 8 minutes of the third. And if in the fourth we need you, maybe. But you're not a part of our closing 5. We have a certain way we want to close games. I mean, he's always played better when he starts. When he plays a consistent role, he puts up 18 plus. And when he doesn't, he puts up 11 of inefficient. So if he keeps getting dangled around, better to trade him for anything. Like the Blazers trade, it was the trade that I added to the Claxton Michael Porter trade. If you need to get him out the door, is the Robert Williams III plus Matisse Thybulle trade from the Blazers. They're both expirings. You get another big who is you roll the dice, but if he doesn't work out, so be it. And at least you have, like, I mean, Robert Williams, when healthy, is basically Trayce Jackson-Davis on steroids. And if not, they both come off the books and you save the $20+ million in the offseason expiring contracts. But if you're not going to play him, a solidified 20 minutes a game, just deal him now. There's no reason, because the numbers have proven he cannot just be dicked around coming in and out. He does not do well with it, despite the last game that we saw him in.
This is the one reason why I think there's a chance Kuminga stays is, again, there's a chance the Butler minutes have to go to someone. There's a chance he could now play 20 to 30 minutes a game. And then you've got the Steve Kerr part of this, where he is on the expiring deal. It could very well be his final season as head coach. If you tell Kuminga, hey, you're going to get opportunity for the rest of the season, and then your biggest adversary, your biggest rival, essentially is gone in the offseason, we're going to get a brand new head coach in here. Like, Kuminga can probably, like, he's requested a trade. He can probably be like, yeah, I'll withdraw that trade request then, and let's just see how things. As stupid as it would be that this cycle and roller coaster would continue, there's actually like a pathway to it continuing in that regard. before we finish up here, we spoke about it very, very briefly. We haven't really touched on it too much. Jimmy Butler for Anthony Davis. How many picks are you willing to give up in order to make that move, or are you just not considering it whatsoever?
Is there a young player that Dallas would covet that we can add in so that it's not a surplus of picks going out for a complete gamble of a player that seems to
Well,
be injury ridden?
yeah, well, they've got interesting Kuminga, so like that. There's, I
Okay, set
propose,
aside
I propose,
Kuminga, whose value is inflated for the very short moment of the post Toronto game. Is there a player that doesn't make 25 million that can easily be added in the trade that the Mavericks like, where we can go Jimmy Butler, the 26, and this player, and that gets it done for Dallas?
Pods, I guess. Pods
And are
might,
you
yeah.
and are you okay with that?
Uh,
That's
de-
more of the question. I mean, I
it
know
depends. It
the names
depends
of
who
the
I'm.
player.
It honestly depends who I'm getting, because if you're adding Kuminga and Pods to the deal, suddenly you're up to like 80 million essentially. And then what else am I getting back for Anthony Davis? Is like Clay's probably part of it, to be honest.
Can't be a
Do
part
I
of
get?
it. This, I mean,
Hmm?
you want that makes the team worse. Period. Yeah, like because he'll play. He's not going to be buried
Yeah.
in the rotation. He's going to play, and Klay Thompson is a corpse of himself.
You
Full
know, like
stop.
Clay's been good this month. Okay, we have to acknowledge that Clay's been good this month.
Klay
Okay,
Thompson ruined like 3 years of my life, and I don't want to see his face again. I don't even watch the Mavericks because of him. He was ruining the team while he was here with his moping, and like the way that he treats Steph Curry now. He has no business being in Golden State locker room. Don't want to see him ever in a Warriors jersey for any reason. Absolutely not. I would say that JK is not supposed to be a part of this trade. If you're sending Butler, Butler's contract with is difficult to move, but not for another player who's making a like-sized contract. So it's like, that's why I asked, is there a player who's making less? Like, is there a Will Richard or a Pajemski or someone of that nature that is easily added where it doesn't complicate things? Because remember, Dallas is in a complicated situation. They can't take on money. We can't take on money. We're going to need a
yeah,
third team to facilitate the
yeah,
little digits and so forth. But like, if you can do it with just the 26 pick, Butler, and one of the young players who are still on a rookie contract, whether it's Pajemski, Will Richard, Post, whoever, is there one that the Mavericks go, yeah, we like that guy enough? They'll probably name him, yeah, which one that they want.
yeah,
And then the Warriors have to ask, are you willing to sacrifice that? Because you're bringing back an all NBA caliber player who almost never plays. So
mm,
the upside's huge and the downside's gigantic. And I think that's the question. You can't give up the 28 and 30 pick for Anthony Davis.
no,
You
no,
know I don't care about the picks. I care about him more than that. Like that's
yeah,
a
yeah.
wild gamble.
I think the max is the 26 and the 28. That's the absolute max that you're willing to go, because at least Steph will still be around. And again, Dunleavy said it yesterday. Like, we need a player. If we're going to give up picks post Steph, we need a player that's going to impact post Steph. Anthony Davis isn't necessarily going to do that. Is there a?
Do you like the fit
do-
though? With do you like the Anthony Davis Draymond fit in the front court closing games?
So it's interesting to me. So the other thought I had is, okay, if Kuminga's not going to Dallas, or there's some kind of 3-team trade, can you get something else using Kuminga's salary? So, for example, could you dump absolutely every pick, right in every pick, maybe Pods as well, and could you go and get Anthony Davis and Trey Murphy the third? And suddenly it's like 3 picks going to the Pelicans, a pick and Pods going to the Mavericks or something, and you're getting Anthony Davis and Trey Murphy, for example. And
No,
you're
no,
ending
no.
up with a team where it's like Steph, Moody or Melton, Trey Murphy, Draymond, Anthony Davis. Like, is that, and you are absolutely emptying everything in the way of picks for those two guys. Because contractually you can do it. You can do Jimmy Butler and Kuminga for and Pods or Buddy Hield or whatever, an additional salary, and you can go and get $75 to $80 million worth of players, which is Anthony Davis and Trey Murphy. Like, or is there like another player out there that you go and get in addition to Anthony Davis as well, using the Kuminga money and the Buddy Hield and Moses Moody. Like this, the Warriors have nearly $100 million here they could potentially use.
Yep.
Okay, and all their draft picks. So is there a combination of players that makes sense?
I love the intellectual exercise, and I love the idea. I just hit the question back to you because I'm on the fence about what Trey Murphy's value is. You seem to be higher. Okay? So let's do the exchange. And right now, I'm looking at the roster in my head from top to bottom with the 2 additions. Do you think that team can punch above its weight with Trey Murphy at the 3, Draymond at the 4, Davis at the 5, Curry and Melton? Yeah, Melton won't be going out for sure. So instead of thinking about which young players are left, is that 5-man team knocking out OKC, the Nuggets, and so forth? Like, not saying guaranteed. Yeah, we don't have a trade that guarantees us. We're looking to punch above our weight. Is it worth emptying the clip? I'm on the fence about Trey. So do you think he's the guy? Because you seem to think that there is a gigantic difference between Trey and Michael Porter. In my opinion, this year, Michael Porter Jr. in the playoffs is a better player, at least offensively, and he's a better rebounder, even though Trey's a good rebounder. And I've heard, I'm watching enough Pelicans to know exactly what type of defender Trey Murphy is. I've always been under the impression that he is a plus defender, but I've heard people on the Dunked On podcast describe him as not on the level of a Herb Jones, and that they're often compared, but that's not really a fair comparison defensively, that he is a decent defender, but not like a all-world defender. So
I don't think he's Herb Jones. I think he's probably better than Michael Porter. I just think there's a big contractual thing here with Trey Murphy versus MPJ, where it's like, I know it's $13 million might not sound like a lot, but it kind of is. And then MPJ's 40, another like 13 more next season. And then based on what MPJ is doing this season, his next extension is going to be something more than the final year of Trey, like the last 2 years of Trey Murphy's contract, which is still like less than $30 million. So that, to me, that's just where the value lies. He's also like, he's a couple of years younger. He's at a Pelicans team where it's like, that's just dysfunction, right? And he's already putting up these great numbers on a dysfunctional team. Like, I think he's significantly more. And it's not just what I think. I'm just basing this off on what we've been reported as well, which is the Warriors would be willing to give up multiple first-round picks for Trey Murphy, but they've been hesitant to, and they're unwilling to for Michael Porter Jr. Okay, so
and I think the reason though is more asset based rather than on-court based, and that's really my question though. If we're talking about this season and amplifying Steph, this idea that we would do it for Trey because it also is an insurance for the future, I think is a poor reason to add into the equation, because you just empty the clip for all the picks for a player that is never going to be an all-NBA player. He's not an all-NBA player. He might be an all-star. He is not going to be if he makes an all-NBA, it's going to be one of those guys that makes a single third-team all-NBA selection. He is not ever going to be a top 10 player. So dropping all the picks because it makes you feel a little better about the future seems to be it's like a middle ground of I don't want to do it for these players, but because this player somehow makes the future a little more tolerable, we'll do it. But it doesn't put us over the edge anyways. If we're going to put in picks, I personally think optionality-wise, the future right now in the next 2-3 years and the on-court, Claxton and Michael Porter Jr. is a better bet than Anthony Davis and Trey Murphy. And I know that sounds on paper, prior to this year, that sounds outrageous.
Yeah.
Anthony Davis just gets hurt always, and his motor, you have to get him up. Sometimes, like we were talking about, sometimes you see him on a day and he looks fantastic. The next day he looks disinterested. And those two guys in Brooklyn, they love playing basketball. I don't know how much Anthony Davis loves to play basketball. He's very good at it. And then Trey Murphy, somehow, because he's young, everything he does is real. Michael Porter Jr. in Brooklyn, those are not real. Michael Porter Jr.'s shots are as hard as anybody's. So that's just, but Trey Murphy, they want to go get him. They want to empty the clip. I'd love to see Trey Murphy on the Warriors. I love his game. the guys that can shoot and finish with that type of ferocity is there's almost none. So I'd rather just ignore the Anthony Davis portion of it. They want to overpay for Trey Murphy. I think that's a better bet than getting in bed with the Anthony Davis situation, especially after the finger injury. I think he just has no pain tolerance. I think that something that you would play through, like for the rec league, is something that he considers a serious injury. And I'm not the only person that thinks that. So
Yeah, look, the Trey thing has been kind of a dream since the offseason, and it's a real shame that, like, it could still happen. There could be a deal where the Warriors give up Kuminga and multiple first-round picks for Trey Murphy before the deadline. It's just a shame that you're wasting the rest of this season, because if it was Trey and Jimmy and Steph and Draymond, then you'd have something. But because there's no Jimmy, like, you could go and get Trey, but that doesn't change the fact Jimmy's out for a year. Okay, and that's the real shame in all of this, I suppose, at the end of the day. So anything else you want to add before we finish up?
just wanted to ask you one more question because you brought up Steve and his him as a lame duck coach this year, and that he's on an expiring deal himself. I've never really got your opinion on it. If you got to give him an extension now or sign him in the offseason, are you still in the boat that he is the general of this franchise moving forward, at least for one additional year? Or would you say, based upon what we've seen up to this point, would you move on from him and get some fresh eyes on this roster moving forward?
I think while Steph is still here, I would probably remain with Steve Kerr. I know he cops a lot of criticism. There could be very much an instance of you don't know what you've got till it's gone kind of thing if he does walk away at the end of this season. So I am kind of on the fence about it in terms of I don't have a huge stance either way. Like, if he walks and the Warriors get a new coach in, then it might be the best thing for him. New ideas might actually work out well. But I'm also of the opinion of he's a 4-time championship winning coach. Okay, yes, people can say he's rode the coattails of Steph Curry. Like, I get it, but you've still got to be a good head coach, right, to achieve what he's achieved. And I'm not sure an immediate upgrade is necessarily out there for the Warriors. Like, do they go to someone who's been tried and tested, or do they go to a brand new head coach who you've really got no idea on? I don't know. We might wait and see, because I think there is a chance that this is his final year. What about
Agreed.
you?
And I just to beat a dead horse, I think Steve Kerr is a good coach when he's not forcing the offense to run through Draymond. And or worse, when he doesn't have Draymond and he's trying to make Juan Toscano play as if he were offensive version of Draymond. Every time that he allows the offense to be the offense, the system looks good. The system's not the problem. It's the reliance on that version of the system. I don't think it's Steve.
Yeah. Let's see if he gives Jonathan Kuminga the opportunity to be Jimmy Butler in the next couple of weeks before the deadline.
Sure.
All right, Stevie, thanks again, mate. We'll catch up again in a week's time, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more to discuss from there.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, man.